some bits and pieces. So you just make you aware that we're continuing on the workshop in a live stream sense. So thanks for the coming back after the afternoon session. Given it's after lunch, we're going to make sure you get up and have a bit of a wander around and stay fully engaged in the topics. So this is effectively the top of the long-term plan work. So you'll all be aware that we've talked about long-term planning for a few months, and it's been in the back of our minds. And there was a comment made right at the start of during the effectively when the councillor induction was going on, and I think that from the deputy chair actually saying that the LDP is probably one of those opportunities to influence the future of the organisation in the direction of travel, and actually you a chance to have a real meaningful shift, or get your aspirations articulated in that space, just because it is that enduring document for the next 10 years around getting the direction, what we do, how we do it, and how we fund those pieces of work. So effectively, this is our first opportunity to start getting under the hood, start building the long-term plan and setting that direction for the next 10 years. So we've got a reasonably busy work program from here through to about May next year and June next year, when it finally gets adopted prior to 1 July 2027. So with the central government changes, there's been some questions around whether LTPs are still required and where their status is, and should we bother spending a lot of energy on the LTP, given that there's amalgamations proposed, there's regulatory changes, the Resource Management Act is disappearing, rates capping is going to be one of those things. So effectively, where we stand today, and any messaging that we've received from central government is that there's no change to the legislation around long-term plans at this stage. So we've been listening, and there's no signals, no messaging, no commentary around the future of long-term plans. And even the cabinet paper released last week still talks about grouping of activities in the long-term plans for regional councils and how that becomes a transitional process into new entities. So it's still capturing our actions, capturing our assets, understanding how the work that we're doing is going to continue to endure beyond the current arrangement of local government. So as far as we can tell, with long-term plans, this is going to be a key component need to be delivered by 1 July next year. So effectively, we're going to start with the strategic direction. So part of the strategic direction effectively is building a shared evidence-based and a shared position around how we consider and make decisions and shape the long-term plan for 2027, 2037. And the purpose of this session today is to define those strategic priorities, the principles that inform some draft decision-making criteria. So effectively, what we want to be able to do is establish a set of principles and decision-making criteria that we can refer back to as we're going through the LTP. And it's quite clear that effectively we've got a local government election coming up in late 2028. So the current governance arrangements in Southland will change at some point between here and 2028. It's likely that new election in 2028 will have a new entity arrangement. So, as councillors around the table today, that effectively you as governors will only really see the first year and a bit of this long-term plan, and then it will become a new entity that will take over the governance and management of the functions associated with what the regional council currently does. So what we're seeking to achieve with the principles and the decision-making criteria is have something that future governors and yourselves as governors can look back on some of those principles and weigh up the decision-making criteria and go, we've got these priorities, we've got new things coming at us from Wellington, how do we manage the direction set for the organisation, and how do we, what principles or handrails should we create for future decision makers when they're considering the assets, work, the mandatory requirements, the bits and pieces that we do as a regional council. What sort of guidelines should we do in terms of principles and decision-making criteria that will assist them to understand and make the right decisions and have the right framework in place so that it's not a coin flipping exercise around what starts and stops and what carries on. So the principles and the strategic framework at the start of that process to really give some good guidance for decision makers, whether that's yourselves or a future entity in the future around the future of our actions. So that's the basis, and also the strategic framework assists with the swirling information that are in your heads, the change that's occurring. There's a lot of drivers and risks and advocacy groups saying different things. The strategic framework is a way of pulling together some of those big things and narrowing it down into action. So at the start of the LTP process, we want to start bringing some of those big concepts, some of those big things that are going on in the region, and really start galvanising it down into some certainty around how do we provide the organisation with the direction we need and have the mechanisms in place to ensure there's accountability and measuring of the right aspects to ensure that we're doing the right thing. You as councillors have got assurance that the organisation is on the right track. So the strategic framework, pulling all those big things and starting to narrow them down into priorities. 2 weeks ago, the exec spoke to you about priorities, and we'll be circling back to those priorities today and sense checking them with the environmental scan moving forward. So that's the intent for the workshop today. So scene setting, we're going to talk about the environmental scan, and then we're going to do the drivers for change. You can go walking around the room. I circulated a bit of few reading packs towards the end of last week to assist with the environmental scan, and then we'll put up some of the posters around the wall for the key drivers within each of those topics. So we'll be working around those two and bringing that into the strategic priorities and making sure there's some alignment there and testing them and moving through the next steps. Is there any questions so far? I can see Alice is ready to ask a question.
No, I'm just deeply concerned about this because only 3 or 4 months ago the government said, well, all regional councillors, we don't have them. So what the hell are we doing this for? You know, like, it just puts you right on. Because we go and do all this, where we should be going and doing something that might actually affect our ratepayers or constituents, and we get a better view of it, they get a better view of us. They're the ones that judge us every 3 years. So can you explain to me why if they want to cut us off, how do we have a standing to do all this?
Yeah, good question. I guess it's what they say, but it's what they do. It's what they say, but they haven't actually made any indication around changing the legislation yet to require us not to do long-term planning. So at this point in time, it's still a legislative requirement that we produce a long-term plan next year to govern the drivers and what we do moving forward.
Wouldn't we be better to go and do a spatial plan, go and do our what do you call it, coastal plan? You know, with this stuff here, it's all just going to go, as I see it, into oblivion. Like, could just go.
Can I actually offer our perspective, which might answer in part some of those concerns? Rachel used the term this morning during the American Advocacy Forum that the LTP represents our contract with the community. And it seems in this instance we are updating the contract with the community. We are securing a mandate from our community to invest their money in a certain range of functions. The interesting difference is that we are going to be passing that contract over to some future government entity to manage on our behalf and to continue to support the community. So, in some respects, it's even more important than ever to make sure that that is a thorough and well thought out contract, that it results from the LTP plan process, and it's got a certain resilience, so that when our time is finished and we pass it to a new governance entity, they can pick it up and say, actually, we have a mandate to continue investing in biosecurity or flood resilience or enviro schools education. So I see that as the reason why we're doing this, because the functional needs don't go away just because the councillors that provide current government to this entity go away at the end of this election cycle. I would have thought that's the overarching reason why we continue to invest in LTP.
I hope you're right.
And I think to add to that, local government elections in 2028, there's still going to be, like, if there is a new entities created for the region, they're going to have a base document to start with, to start amalgamating and aggregating until that next planning cycle kicks off in 2030, will be the next LTP, which will be new unitary LTPs or whatever sort of arrangement out of that system. It's still got to be a transitional document from where we are today to what will exist in our future.
And it will roll into the spatial and regional plans.
Correct.
We can only hope that what we decide on can be used in the future.
Yeah.
And I think it will be.
For me, it feels like this LGP is a capturing of the institutional knowledge and the experience around the table, the chart, the course, and really set that knowledge and understanding of saying this is where we got to as a regional council, and here's the big things that are a must do into our new environment. Here's the direction set for the future of these aspects, whether that's assets or water quality or biosecurity, biodiversity. Is the direction that we consider as the right foot forward for Southland moving forward. And I think if we get to the end of the LTP cycle and that's where we land, I think that would be a good job done. And whatever future entity comes up with in the future direction will somewhat be guided by legislative requirements. At least they've got the best knowledge and understanding from the regional council to build into that process.
Well, I agree with the Council Morrison's affirmation here. I think we need to be mindful that we want to isolate those core functions of the council and see if we can have a reasonably streamlined approach to that. Particularly around going forward to the new transition. Those core functions that we need to hone in on, I believe.
Definitely. And I think that there's sort of three key components up on the slide at the moment. So today we're going to talk through the environmental scan. So that's effectively the pack that I sent out last week. Now we've been working pretty hard on. We're going to work on our strategic framework of sort of the what, so what, and then the activity management planning is the down in the details. What actions are we doing? What are we committing to? What money are we allocating to which activity, and what does success look like in working through that process? So effectively by the end of this workshop, we're going to look to make sure you have an understanding of the environmental scan and its gaps. So that'll be an exercise we're going to walk around. We're going to go to the top 10 drivers. So at the moment, there's probably 80 drivers around the world, so we're going to try and narrow that down to the top 10 things that are going to really impact this LTP and use that to validate against the strategic priorities and the principles that we make decisions on And then, Andrew has some decision-making criteria as well coming out of the session. So it's reasonably high and broad, and then this will create the foundation which we can build into the activity management planning piece moving forward. So for the environmental scan, I'll get Gail to do a bit of talking around the environmental scan. And then we'll get you up and walk through the specific dots.
Yeah, thank you, Marcus. So the purpose of the environmental scan is to share what we currently know about our operating environment. So the key thing to recognize here is our operating environment is constantly changing. So before we set the direction for the next 10 years, it's important for us to pause, take a step back, and understand the forces that's shaping our environment. So many of these matters will be new to you, you probably know, but this is to bring them together to show you the complete picture. And allow us to share, build that shared understanding, shared evidence base for this activity. So components of this will be used to strengthen the strategic direction and the assumptions and the risk choices and the deliverability of ILTP. So the key message here is this is about making sure that we are starting from the same understanding before we make before we move into decisions. So what an environmental scan is? So an environmental scan is a structured review of key drivers shaping our future. So in this case, for the LTP, it's the next 3 to 10 years. That's the crucial part, and we are looking at some factors that would go beyond that 10 years as well. So it's bringing together signals from political, legislative, economic, social, technological, and even organizational factors. So again, some of these are established trends, but some of these are signals and emerging issues which have some uncertainty linked to it. So again, two important things to highlight here is first, it's a point in time. Like I said, it's the best information that we have today because the environmental scan will be evolving. It's a living document. So what we know today might change tomorrow. And some of these, again, like I said, they are established trends and some of these are uncertainties. So what it's not a decision-making forum today, and it's not about debating around preferred policies, or it's not about listing projects and solutions. So what this scan covers, so it's at 3 levels. So it's understanding our broader environment, that's the macro factors. So that's the political, legal, economic, social factors. That's our broader operating environment. Then we have the second layer, that's the relationship factors. That's our community, that's our partnerships, that's the stakeholder relationships, and including AV. And then we have our internal factors as well. That's our organizational capability, capacity, and assets. So in the reading pack we've given you, a very structured review of all of this. So again, like I said before, the purpose of the environmental scan is to show you the complete picture. It's not to show you part of it. So you kind of need to understand it from a holistic perspective. So by the 2027 and 37 LTP is different. So we've discussed some of this in the morning as well as during some of the previous sessions we've had. So we've listed a few key drivers here, but we'll be going around later around the room, and we'll be kind of sense checking some of these as well. So from some of the key things that we've kind of identified, the governance uncertainty and structural change, the reform and system resets, affordability constraints, capacity and delivery constraints, so climate pressures, hazard risk, and nationalized standardization of evidence, even the regulatory workload and compliance step changes, and I've listed few more there. But also what's important is what this means for our LCP. So again, I think we've touched on some of this during our previous sessions as well. So one, it has to be transition ready. It has to be financially sustainable. It should be capacity realistic. We have to be honest about what we can deliver. So it has to put resilience first. Again, socializing the license anchored as well. We have to be clear about our purpose, role, our regional voice. That's quite important still. Yeah, so those are a few things, but this is what we will be testing today.
So the workshop exercise, so effectively the thing we want you to do as councillors, and we'll stick there and exec do the same, is have a wander around the A2 pages on the wall, and effectively have a read through of what you sort of have been circulated anyway, but have a read through and see if there's anything that's missing that you think within, for example, political factors here, but it's something, you know, actually this is a political factor that we should be thinking about that's going to impact this organisation and the work we do for the next 10 years. Jot it down on a sticky note and stick it up on the pages. And then what we're going to do later on is go back and prioritise your top 5 key drivers. So at the moment it's a bit of a read and understand, get us all on the same page, and if there's anything missing, you know, for example, environmental factors, if we haven't talked about nitrates or we haven't picked up any sort of key drivers, put them down on the wall, and then we can, you know, we can factor that in and that'll be part of our prioritisation. So that's for exec as well. Anything you see that is missing, you need to make sure that we capture all of the key drivers that are going to impact this long-term plan and this organisation for the next 10 years. So you've got 10 minutes. To grab a pen and post-it notes and have a bit of a wander around and a read. And add anything that you think is missing.
Yeah, but if you have any,
Spotting gaps on what we thought.
How big you want to make this?
Yes. Good. So what Marcus just told me.
Oh, it's an option, but I'm not sure if it's an option.
Oh, thanks, man.
Yes.
Oh, is it sorry? I'm supposed to be doing my phone. Thank you. Yeah, he did it. Yeah. Seriously?
One of the top three was to get into a place where you were sheer more. Describing hoses on policy. Not a serious thing.
Just make sure you're walking around and checking all of the ones, not crowding too much on one spot. Give it about 2 minutes and then we'll do the prioritization piece.
an example of that.
Yeah, I know. I'm just.
Slow down. What do you mean? I'll picture the
We'll get you to start putting your prioritization dots on. So if you've got your dots in hand, everything they strongly resonate with you. Get 5 dots for. You put your top 5 dots on the key drivers that you think are going to impact this organisation moving forward. Your 5 dots each. Your dots on the page that most resonate with you for the 5 drivers, everything that you've seen. Yeah, so you can put more than 1 dot on each driver. So ideally what we're trying to do is identify which are the key drivers. So if there's one that resonates, stick a dot on, even if there's a dot there, stick another dot on.
Okay, right. I missed it. Wasn't Yes.
Oh, please. Not adding the blank.
Teams here, I am.
I've been through lots of these things and I'm a bit of a need. expect them to move directions.
All right, thanks everybody for that exercise. Just make sure that everybody's had a fair opportunity to wander around. What we're going to do is capture all of the clusters and the key themes. Just a reminder that we are still streaming live to a home near you, just so that to make sure that as we work around that this is still a live conversation. So in the meantime, while we're gathering all those key pieces up on the board, we can pull into a slide. Within groups, keen for you guys to have a discussion around what are the key themes and what have you noticed? And then what we'll do is we'll work through the top 10 drivers and some commonalities.
Just can I ask a question or a bit of guidance or alignment for the middle team? But LTP casts out a 10-year time horizon.
Yeah.
And we know that regional spatial planning is asked us to cast out a 30-year time horizon. And within that 10-year LTP plan, we did 3 years detail budget. In this case, should we be kind of understanding what the 10-year time horizon looks like, understanding that that's going to set us up or position us for success at the 30-year time. So I guess what I'm saying is being aware of what the 10-year time horizon suggests, but not losing sight of the fact that it's a stepping stone to it's a progression to
Yeah, correct. It will be like an exercise similar to probably a much grander and more thorough, detailed scale for a 30-year plan. This is sort of the next 10 years. What are we going to think about to set us up as an organisation next 10 years? There will be some longer-term implications, but probably that 10-year horizon is the key piece at this stage.
10 years is their focus.
Yeah. So yeah, any sort of key themes that you thought about, any sort of glaring gaps or what have you noticed?
I guess that's an interpretation, Marcus, on some of these things as you woven them up with what they really mean. You'll see complementary things in the exercise. It's a lot smaller and carry on, but in some of the areas, of course, so yeah, I don't think too many of us got on to different things and we're able to compare them and go,
you know, these are the top two sort of thing, because it's quite a lot of stuff to take in.
Yeah, definitely. I guess the next exercise that we're going to get into is how do these things that are going on around your brains, the big things that are going to impact the organisation, do they link, or how well do they link to the priorities of the organisation over the next 10 years, which you've seen a draft of a couple of weeks ago. So how do they link together? Do we make sure? And that's what the next task is going to be. If once we get out to the top 10, we go, how do they link to what we're doing about it as an organisation?
I understand where you're coming from as an organisation. The reason we're doing this is for the region. As an organisation, the things that as representation, we want to see the organisation do for ratepayers in the region for a better future. Leave. So it's not just for the organisation, it's giving you guys direction on the thoughts, but you know, we're doing it for that reason.
We don't have to forget where we are and what's looking at in front of us with the change in 28. So the political factors have a different focus than they would normally. Yeah, it's in the, you're looking out 3 years, but you know, we're not going to be here for 3 years, let alone 10. So, and all of that's yet to be determined or worked out. So it is quite a different LTP from what you would normally do.
Yeah, definitely. And we want to make sure that we've got our activities and our functions are still got that longevity, so they will endure irrespective of the governance and arrangement of local government. Jeremy,
Yeah, I was just going to say, all this here is far behind. I go back when it's early, so how we do this challenging and stability, how we do this. In regards to that, can we talk, is there somewhere in here reflecting on, you know, and it's nothing negative, it's just saying we've got new plans coming out, new rules coming out, the outcomes, the rules going to bring the outcomes to how we adapting to this new, you know, some, but just overall how we're doing, you know, and getting the right outcomes, working with the community and these things. I'm just saying that's how we do business.
yeah, I think that how will come through in that activity management planning process. So at the moment, the environment is there, what's going on, all those big things that are going to hit us as an organisation. The strategic framework is, you know, so how do we set up our priorities and our principles and what's really going to matter when we're making decisions, and then the activity management planning process that flows out, we go, okay, within this portfolio, this focus area of work, what are the key pieces of work we're going to do, and how do we set ourselves up to do that work on a daily basis, just so that if we need to make an adjustment, we can identify that in the activity management plan. That is the detail. So starting pretty high and funneling down into that detail as you work through to the activity management planning process.
Yeah, a couple of things. To Jeremy's point, I guess what we're staff are asking us is to give them direction on what, so that we can then work out how. The what is the 10-year, what not the 1 year. And the other thing that it might be helpful to keep in mind, I guess, is that given that this fatalistic view is that this is it, this is our legacy. Right, so yes, okay, it's the last LTP we're ever going to do, and what, you know, what's the point? And I get that, it's good, but this is our legacy for Southland. We are always talking about being here for Southlanders. So this is our chance to do our very best to leave a lasting legacy, at least in the short-ish term. Others can't interfere with too much.
Thanks for that. last one, and then we'll jump into the health cost
I
out.
suppose just to Jeremy's point about doing business in it, and I think it does actually, that thought process is probably doesn't reflect what we're looking at or what we need to be looking at around the walls. Just for argument's sake, economic factors, you know, a lot of orange spots sitting on insurance, where if we went back even 4 or 5 years ago, we wouldn't have been that point of focus to the same degree that there is now. So that's, I think, looking back, we're saying earlier about, you know, how do we do, you know, what sort of focus around how we do business? And that potentially is a longer term. You know, just here's an example. Yeah.
Definitely. Cool. Thanks very much. We'll move into the next part, which is the sense making, the so what. Sorry, I think you do that in all those words. So those are the top 10 from water, highest priority, or the highest, or are they just So we've got environmental factors, changing climate, political factors, local government structural reform, environmental factors, biosecurity, for example, wild and climes, economic factors, affordability, economic factors, insurance, partnerships, central government funding, social factors, demographic changes, organisational factors, workforce skill constraints, legal factors, local government and RMA reform, and environmental factors, nature-based solutions. Those are the highlights, I guess, of the dots between, counting the exec ones and the council ones all together in terms of the dot clusters. That's what's popped out of this exercise. So in your groups, have a chat amongst yourselves whether that sort of sense check that for, does that seem right? Is there any sort of glaring gaps in terms of what the drivers are that's going to hit us in the next 10 years?
Somebody told me.
It's fine.
It's going to be with me.
What kind of
But rather than we don't agree with we need to find it. And just taking the information that everyone wonders that it's going to be social development. The contemporary environment challenges is getting harder. The regional strength and you can do it. We are this. Well,
Insurance costs.
So
This. University trust. That's 3 years, 2.5 years. We need I would understand longer trade.
All right, I'll get you to start wrapping up the conversation, and then I'll get Leo and each group to report back on any sort of key findings or key thinking associated with that little chat. So we'll start over here with this table over here. Morris has been
Eric and Jeffrey will be able to fill in the gaps. So demographics, sort of wondered about how important demographic change is. How that's going to influence us. That's social factor demographic change. I'm not sure about how it is. We think that affordability is important, and what we have to do is make sure that we identify all of the things that are important that have to be done, and make sure we do those things efficiently. That's a really important key issue. We asked about insurance as well. What's the story with insurance? How can we afford to insure things that are uninsurable? There's a question mark about that insurance, whether that should be up there. We thought the liaison, ethnic liaison groups is really important. And I think it's well like this morning, maintaining communication and relationship with all these people is a really important factor.
Cool, thanks very much. Down the back.
Few thoughts then. One was that it's getting harder, not easier. The contemporary environment challenges us that one of our regional strengths is our cohesion as a region relative to other regions. Single iwi, four only, single dominant primary sector kind of for our economic, which is a liability as well as an opportunity. So it's going to be a social challenge more than anything else. Therefore, we want to support through the transition process, we want to support the best possible for regional cohesion through that reform process, while also avoiding environmental losses within the RE reform thing. What was interesting, we looked at the clusters on the board and we asked the question, how many of these are unique to Southland versus common to all regions of New Zealand? And what we focused on was the things that are possibly unique to us. Our demographic profile isn't the same as many other regions. Our biosphere relative to other regions is in pretty good nick. What that means is that nature-based solutions might be more easily within reach compared to others, because the degradation that we've experienced is not as severe as other regions. Coastal biosecurity is going to be challenging with such a large coastal area. One idea was that we'll become a bit of a climate change haven, because arguably livability in Southland relative to other regions and other parts of the world might be considered positive as climate change starts to bite.
Cool, thank you. And table for
Way to go, Al. We just should take a little bit of a look at this insurance. And it wasn't the actual insurance that you go and buy. It's actually to get the slow flows, to get the canoa work done in a reasonable sort of a manner, and understanding the costs of it running through. And the thing was to focus not on us, although I had a different values, or our legacy, but to focus on the future of Southland, and get things done for the people. And that was why we probably went to look at the insurance and, topping up banks, so the flows, doing all those sort of things to save every.
And with regards to the local government structural reform, as I've stated, I don't care about the councillors, I don't care about the mayors, I don't care about that at all. We need to look at the new future, the new, because we won't be around. But the new, if we can move through that process and get to something that's better, and the organisations and the staff and a better organisation, then that's good. Because we don't matter, even though we want to, we will make decisions while we can, but there's going to be a point in time where we won't matter, including the mayors.
Cool. Thanks very much. Moving on to the next piece. So we've done the environmental scan piece, so that's next by the different group. Next piece we're going to look at is the strategic framework. So looking at our priorities and working through the principles and decision-making criteria. So what we're looking to set up is taking all of these big drivers that are impacting the organisation for the next 10 years, and then how do we actually articulate that into our priorities, our principles, and how do we get some decision-making criteria embedded in the long-term plan. So we need tension between priorities, we get decisions that need to be made about what you turn down, what you turn up, something else popped up as a priority. How do we lean back on some of the principles and decision-making criteria to go, yes, that gets the tick, no, that doesn't, so there's something to set up some handrails for future decision makers. If it's not yourselves in the space, some future entity, what can they lean back on to make some decisions around
Probabilities is to say what we need to do, not what's nice to do.
Correct. So we need to, I guess, as an organisation, have some common understanding of what the needs to do are. So your view versus everyone else's view is all a cohesive plan or a cohesive approach to working through the necessary steps to go, yes, this passes the test, we're going to fund it, we should carry on. So, for the strategic framework, what are the strategic framework? Well, it's really linked between the environment we're operating in, the outcomes we're seeking, and the decisions and investments we make across the organisation. It helps create greater alignment and consistency across the planning and delivery, while supporting more transparent decision making, clearer prioritisation, and a more strategic approach to developing a long-term plan. So that's typically the basis for the strategic framework, and then the doing, the activity management planning, and the operational components all flow out of the strategic framework. So these are the draft priorities that were presented to you about 2 weeks ago, and we've got them on the tables and printout around a little bit more padding around them and some more, what it means. So effectively just, give this as an opportunity to, look at them again. You've had a couple of weeks to think about them as the organisation strategic priorities move forward. And on the right-hand side here, we've got the intervention principles, which we want to, consolidate with some of the existing principles we've got as well.
So the climate change part that we've really focused on over the last decade is not really part of the shortest run. We drought, so the climate change will be something that I think is missing.
From was that this one's really, so I guess this is part of the next exercise that we're going to get into, is going, if these are the things that are going to be impacting our organisation in the next 10 years, do they link to the strategic direction of the organisation that you're going to give the organisation around how we do our work? So making sure that this strategic is not, then we just need to make sure that there's our draft strategic priorities, reflect existing environment, what's going on, and making sure that if there's any gaps, that we've considered those gaps.
Do you guys think there's anything up here that's not like
It's expanded. It's not one. It shouldn't be. It's all yeah. Yeah.
We're going to read this. It would go on.
Sorry, just very quickly, the strategic priorities have obviously come out of the direction that council gave prior to Christmas, when Tillo do some work with you and watch his, the executive has been framing up since then. The material on the desk is the strategic priorities, the description, and just to be aware that the lists of activities are for the next 12 months, so for next financial year. They are exactly as you saw them a few days ago. But we have taken on board, I know Karen, you've got changes already underway, but we didn't want to give you different information to what you'd seen, but we've already taken on board some feedback. And similarly, we note that some of those things might not end up in a long-term plan. This was the direction of travel for the triennium. So some of the more inward pieces around response readiness, the business continuity planning, etc., might be more foundational, enabling parts. So just wanted to put that context in there for you.
Is there any other comments from exec around around the clusters or any of the top 10 drivers? Any thoughts? No? Cool. So the next exercise is the workshop exercise. So community groups are gonna validate the draft strategic priorities, so effectively trying to understand top 10 drivers of change from the environmental STEM exercise, and then small groups reflect on the draft strategic priorities, note which drivers of change influence each of the draft strategic priorities. So effectively on a, you can go, well, environmental factors, climate change, that impacts the flood resilience, it impacts health catchments, it impacts the future regulator. So sticky note those key drivers into the pre-prepared put your paper pieces, just so that we can go, yes, this involves that, that involves that. This driver is going to impact these three things, and just so we can start getting a bit of a picture around these are the big drivers that are going on. How does that translate into what we're setting the organisation up for in terms of the prioritisation priority?
Well,
future regulator.
You bring that forward.
Yeah, we can say that.
Is
there an organisation check going into future fit? Or in each two?
well, no, we are in the future, but we central government funding
Is there? Special factors? Changes. Economic factors.
Well, flood resilience, all the affordability goes in this. Because if you- Well, I think affordability is going to go in flood resilience as well. Or you actually spend
You got the political factors going.
Right. How are you? Sorry, Myra. Yes.
Yeah.
Solutions.
nature-based solutions.
Gonna go into response.
Oh, I had a workforce and skill. It's actually
And what you want to show something. I got insurance and assurance. You don't want to know it's enough. It's more of an assurance. Come on, we've got to do a bit more. Because they seem to be doing this. Well, once but we didn't listen to you. We can manage it.
We had consensus here.
We're trying to mediation. It started. Yes. I did put in health. I've got nature-based views of intelligence.
I was thinking
Well, I've got starters from
do you know when I checked to see how many it was? Yeah, that's good.
How are we getting on?
Well, I'm going to have this.
Here, he probably
All right, let's start. I think we're recording that. You're going to reverse all this time around with a different speaker on each table. So,
Come on, you have to shut up all the time.
so we'll start with one table of all minutes. So, these are CPs, what was the discussion or whether there was any sort of gaps or any anything that was sort of occupied any time at the table. That was asked.
I don't think there was any gaps. I think it showed connectivity of everything, really, even in health catches, local government, all measures, and whether you're dealing with them or not, how you're dealing with them. And, you know, there's a lot of things across reference, really. And, yeah, quite a healthy discussion. We got
Nice. Nice. Down the back, the lesson of the notes. I have to say the interesting word.
Well, we did use arrows to indicate that there were some factors that naturally connect to all of our strategic priority areas. So climate change.
The rules where you change your agenda.
I'm not saying person was demographic changes also, like climate change, it plays out over a small just by time. It's kind of predictable, but it goes in the flow of across all things. Do you want to speak to all the companies?
No, just any sort of key conversations that you had on any tensions or any sort of gaps that you found when you worked with these.
So one extra post note that wasn't on the list was a question mark against, I've used the term regional intelligence / information. And the idea that excellent information supports excellent decision making. Where within this strategic priority areas would we capture or account for our our excellence in intelligence or information, which I know we've got, and it's inherent in our science capability, which is unique to all of the councils in Southland, is how do we promote, we want to make sure we don't lose sight of that unique strength that this council will bring to the reform. Yeah.
Thanks very much. And the other group?
I did ask other people to do it, but I couldn't bring my writing, so I have to do it again.
But it's more of this identifying the last 12. That's why we changed.
Well, we do it right. Resilience, obviously, climate change, quality, and quantity, and healthy catchments, biodiversity, wilding pines, blossoms, pest control generally. Being responsibility, obviously being flood resilience with structures such as banks, relocation of communities and situations, and HVAC solutions. So that was under that category. Staff capability, I think that's up there somewhere, but it's really important to maintain that. It's an issue that was identified before. Future fit regulator, what will be the new role of the new council, and what will the central government's role be? So there needs to be clarity and distinction between those two. Under the National Natural Environment Act, I'm not sure where this comes from up there, but we need to have prioritized functions for the new regulator. So the new council, whether it's a unitary council or not, clearly has to have the ability to carry on the work we're doing here, and so that it isn't sidelined. Being future fit foundations, relationship with the community, that fits under future fit influence as well. We need more sustainable businesses in Southland to keep working people here and maintain a viable community. We need more renewable energy, but not wind farms. We need solar, local production, distribution, etc. And under future fit influence, we need our social life, of course, and community engagement.
Thanks very much. Just as you councils have been working through this exercise, I had a chat with a couple of my team, and what we recognise is there's a couple of pieces that we talk about a lot at council tables, and they haven't necessarily made it through to the drivers. So we're wondering around what those gaps are around, are they still top of mind, or is it more sort of a longer term view that you're looking at for this exercise in 10-year horizon? And they are effectively the floodbanks, coastal freshwater assets, land, for example, and the G-grid gravel. So those things are generally around the council table quite a lot. Interesting to have it sort of come through in the drivers. The note over here in terms of asset and flood events. Part of the environment stands is 3 orange dots, and one of the, I think it's the last or second last dots to go on was around flood infrastructure work, increasingly need to avoid and manage environmental impacts, increasing mitigation requirements, consider complexity and a whole lot of costs. So the infrastructure and our flood infrastructure in particular hasn't really shone through in terms of getting up on the board as a key driver for the next 10 plus years. So just wanted to, I guess, bring some back to the conversation too and go, working backwards from our priorities, are our drivers on the whiteboard still appropriate, or do we need to make sure that we have got those drivers well referenced that inform the nature of the work we do?
Because of we've always dealt with address a lot of getting on with it in the last LTV. I guess very self-conscious and not. Spending more time with the LTV than we're actually looking at further and through other activities to deliver on the LTV.
Yeah,
Some of that.
and maybe it's the short term pain for us, but that longer horizon going, actually some of these bigger things will help get us across the line. So just something to think about in terms of your views.
For me, a lot of those things are done in those
And the priorities.
Flood resilience is huge. Some of the other things, the healthy catchments, water quality, quantity, biosecurity. So for me, that's the next layer down of
The priorities actually, I was thinking around the linkage back to the drivers, the dotting exercise. Just making sure that's through.
I'm sure every year we discussed it through central government funding, because if we could get that, we could do it. If we couldn't, well, we can't.
Yeah, I think, Marcus, under the flood resilience, it comes under, keeping the flood banks up to optimisation and gravel management, all those issues we felt came under flood resilience, and also probably health catchment as a result. We you've got a bit of a subsection of the fit with the Charlie too. I think it's well covered if we expand out a little bit.
I'm wondering to those three dots. This, I suppose, listening to people when I'm saying we've got this, it's almost a gimme, we're doing this. And those things with canal funding, 5-year projects, and that's going to carry on. It's going to be more tranche. It's almost like we just grab that money. We know that it has to be done. But then again, in a transition, if it goes, we want to make sure that wherever this goes with local government reform structure, you need to focus. It's a big focus to the amount of money we're pumping into that. It's one of our biggest items. And I know the last there was a major discussion with the airline, so it's huge going into it. So it is an interesting one that we're actually not really specifically, we just fall under how do we actually make focus on into the in there what we're playing now. Maybe we're taking just cruising, taking for granted that this business is huge anyway. What is priority is what we priority for the community. Communicate.
Yeah, and I think that sort of picks up on the next part of the exercise is looking at our principles. So we've got some principles on the pages in front. They've come through the position statement that were endorsed by previous council, and then part of the briefing back to this council is to, how do we go about making those decisions? How do we think about trading off tensions? So in terms of ensuring that some of the key work that we've got lined up for this next 10 years remains front of your mind as future decision makers are working through prioritisation and funding allocation to different pieces of work. But the principles are really going to assist being that sort of handover. This is what you should be thinking about when you go through decision making prioritisation for investment moving forward. So that's effectively the next exercise build.
I was on the call yesterday talking about unitary authorities, and it was interesting. The mayors of Marlborough and Tasman both said that TA's functions can sort of take over a bit, and some of the catchment functions were needed more people, more sourcing. So maybe we do have to flag the stop banking thing, given that we're expecting it to be passed over to an entity that will have TAs and make sure it's not lost. There's been a big priority with people that may not have the focus we have come along.
That's a great segue into the next exercise.
Perhaps I could just make a comment following that. Southland is probably quite unique, I think, within New Zealand, with having 4 main rivers flowing down repeatedly through the whole province. And so flooding are a really high priority for Southland and protection of the land and people.
Yeah, particularly when you look at where the townships in Southland are located and the number that have a risk profile known to flooding. Yeah, we are in a unique situation. So on your tables, we've got a printout of the principles. These are the principles that were outlined in the position statements that were endorsed by previous council and part of the reading pack. So effectively what we seek to do is same exercise as you've done on the big push paper. These are the principles that are on the table linked to the priorities. So effectively all we're looking to do is make sure that when we start thinking about decisions or making prioritisation between the priorities, if everything's a priority, then how do we make sure we get priorities and priorities? We need to have a bit of a backstop or something to lean on to help give us some guidance around, is this the right decision to be making? How do we manage trade-offs within all of those priorities? So we want to make sure the principles, are they fit for purpose, and do they link to the priorities, the 6 priorities that you've got on your purchase paper? So in a different pen colour, write down the principles and how they link to the priorities. Identify any gaps.
The
well-being as opposed to go. We don't know what the future legislation will require us to do. There's a focus on it. This is sort of when we look about true north, this is our direction and principles that we want decisions to be made on.
And then put the numbers against.
You've got with them, so you were saying put your numbers on
This is the exercise. We need to update the principle.
Well, it's let's think about future fit regulator. Experience. So you say the whole community.
You just got to watch it. A certain path. You just got to I'm trying to get the philosopher. It's all about. Yeah. Transition that the market must be allocated. So it's not really real.
Well,
We are
they typically
whatever we do,
why your
We are transferring the balance and the certain trade-off. Everybody agree?
We're going very well.
You wouldn't make a change. You just you would be able to make it, or you just will say, we are not whole parties.
yeah, that's good to know. So we
Well, whatever we do. Okay, well, let's do it. We take a long-term whole system of educational we take a long-term system. Just saying.
Chinese or Japanese.
I said that, we will need to hold transition partners to account.
And we need
There's a long give and take, but it's going to be a core function. You just can allocate somewhere along the line. So as we go through that transition process, Jeremy, you need our making sure
and council's like, you put father in that children, every time you do one, because
Well,
I just say you can justify a lot of things for long term though, and maybe in the short term, it's not we balance the public well-being, some of our last issues. I'm not sure on that, but it's cultural. That's full I'm just raising this issue. And I was trying to get other categories for it, but probably the first one to come we are inside scrimmage using that, but besides, are you climate change
Just
Yeah, this guy. We'll just pop it down. We'll frame
I thought we needed to do the numbers.
and then we keep it as talking. We take a long-term holistic view, we consider intergenerational outcomes and broader system effects, and not just immediate effects, but also increasingly in some futures.
This part. As well as the whole system view.
This immediate effects.
Yes. See the water going through the
All right, get the reporting back. So, what after the report back? Sorry, Mark's just speaking. In the report back, make sure that you consider the principles, the amendments to the principles, and keen to understand if you think there's general alignment with the principles and the priorities. So we'll start with that table, someone other than Councillor Morrison.
Okay, I'll for the conversation, but we have got many from, we're all happy with elevated number one. Number 8, we are at transition, resilience, continue
we just a question mark against whether making principles needed being we are transition resilient. We ensure continuity of central functions through the transition.
Yep. So there's a proposal for one new principle.
Yeah.
A suggestion, I'm just saying if there's a general consensus that everybody thinks that's probably a good addition.
We did, obviously, we did that, we incorporated and we sort of moved with these authorities listed. But we did discuss, but I think number 2
The speaking up by that individual principle was when we had this workshop in December, the transition that was confronting us as council was probably less obvious. It was proximate to us. Now that it's moving, I think every time we make a decision, we should ask, is this going to survive? The new system.
Yeah.
Because if it's not, and we don't, if we want to survive, it's not going to survive. We're going to do it differently.
So other councils, general consensus, the transition ready as a principle that we should be including in our organisation principles for the long-term plan?
Yeah.
So I guess we're pretty happy on that. All right, table of fronts.
Yeah, so we didn't change any order. We've had a wording changes. So, principle three, we take long-term whole system review. We consider intergenerational outcomes, water system impacts. The question mark we had was around affordability. So there needs to be something in there around the associated cost of that principle. So, checking, having I suppose, a check across that principle around cost. We balance four well-beings in every decision. And the question we had was, how does this reflect legislation changes? Because that's imminent, isn't it, around those four well-beings? So thinking about that. And we embed climate thinking, we embed climate thinking in everything we do. Climate change is not a standalone issue, it's a lens we apply to planning, decision making, and delivery across all functions. We don't disagree with that. What we disagree with is perhaps the way it's framed. Okay, so we think it could possibly be framed a little differently. Yeah.
Now.
Which one?
Did you have some suggestions wording for the reframing? Or
We hadn't got that deep into it. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. That's probably an next.
So, in terms of the other councils, is there a general sort of agreement around the financial piece fitting into affordability, sorry, into the, which principles, the
long-term whole system. Yeah. So we're saying in the long term, you might think something's worth doing, but in the short term, you might end up with massive rate rises acceptable to the community. We read this in the funding.
sounds like the general sort of consensus, we need something in there like that.
I also, people disagree with it. The second one was we are in a whole partnerships with Manawhenua and Manawala and community because we were mandated.
Yeah, it was a community piece, maybe the first one popped out on the other table as well, so I think there's probably consensus around adding community into the principles one of these.
Well-being is the community.
Yeah, but what if they just appear as part of the legislation?
There's a piece of reference was not X.
Correct.
Will be political debate.
The current statement predicts that Manawhenua are partners under the HPP, and I don't know if other parties that can claim that same status under the HPP, so I'm not sure if it would be appropriate to add community as alongside Manawhenua.
And last table.
Right, yeah, we actually filled his community knowledge under the number one principle here, and we felt that farming families in particular, but any long-standing families in the community did build up a lot of intergenerational knowledge over the years. So we were thinking that we could need it for number one, because number two is more quite specific. Number three, fitted into most of these other six headings we have here. So the four well being is little as pointed out, we do. we added the word change into climate change, everything we do, so it might be a small thing that we felt would be there. And secondly, as we progress with more weather patterns, we certainly need to have that. So we have within the law that goes about Southland, and the big one, number 7, actually adds most because it's more around social life. We felt transparent about taking risks, uncertainty and trade-offs and so forth. So we need to have that social life for everything we do, and the transition ready for whatever holds for us in the next couple of years.
Two big changes I picked up, and that was adding community knowledge into that first top one. This is a general sort of consensus of councils that's worth adding, which is the institutional knowledge and families engagements.
I don't think it's even either, and I think we need to include community, which is what we mandated to do. So I think we need to put that there somewhere.
We felt it would be number 1 here than the second one there.
The issue with doing that is that it would be seen to privilege someone by virtue of how long they've been in Southland.
No, we're saying community knowledge. We don't need to be specific about it.
So it wouldn't be a statement that if you've got a longer experience with Southland,
That would be that.
I feel community needs to be there. If anyone else does it, then it's fine.
so I think what I'm hearing, Paul, is there's a question about community knowledge versus community full stop. That was, I think, what I hear was that community knowledge can shed some benefits of integrating the knowledge. Is that what you were saying at this time?
Yes, intergenerational knowledge throughout the community. That could be in rural town and the likes of the Calgary.
There's expert knowledge in that.
Yeah, I guess.
Oh, we don't need expert knowledge. Community knowledge.
Maybe expert out.
We're not taking that out.
The expert out.
Expert and community knowledge.
You still recognise clients and Maharangamara and also that.
So currently the principals have insight driven, science, the law, whenua, does not have the word community in it. That is our primary function that we're mandated to be here for after 28. Ultimately, at the end of the day, our principles don't mention, they mention law, the 4 well-beings, climate, insight-driven, science, but not community.
I think we should be more specific around the 4 well-beings and actually spell them out. So it's not 4 well-beings in terms of the local government 4 well-beings. Should we be more specific and get them out in terms of the text?
I just want to make sure we use still this. Why are we here?
So
Why are we here? Because it seems quite relevant. As soon as you mention community, it's like, no, we don't want to put it in there.
Community, for instance, community wellbeing is stated at the end of number 4. And it's community wellbeing, that 4 wellbeing goes.
No, but to include the community. To include the community, not just in the well-being. The whole principle about doing things and future-proofing and going and investing in the future is for our community. So we want to include them in our principle. That's my thought.
can I just suggest that actually it might be a good reminder think that these principles operate as a filter. And so not any one of them will operate alone when we apply it to the strategic priorities. So if it's mentioned in one principle, it still contributes to the grid filter that decisions will be made through. So it doesn't necessarily have to be mentioned in every strand because the strands work together to make the filter. And I think the four well-beings covers the community input, as does many of the as do many of the other strands. They all fit together to form the filter. So we don't necessarily need to isolate it in every single principle, because it's kind of the bed frame that the filter sits within. To your point, it's all about that, right? So the community are actually the frame that holds all those principles together, and then the strategies and the priorities are filtered through those principles.
It's just the same we live in Southland, the word Southland's not included in our principles.
So I think
that community.
Or if you look at the back wall mission statement, and that mission is not changing, that the overarching purpose, which sits above all of this work doing in LP, that overarching purpose doesn't change. And mission remains community-centric. And I would argue that as long as you don't lose sight of that mission, whatever we are doing subsequently is going to be aligned with that community outcome.
Well, that's great, but in our community, there's some that believe that people have more say than others. So I'd like to include, and ultimately, at the end of the day, if we don't even have that word within our principles, then that's fine. If I'm going to disagree with everyone, or everyone's going to disagree with me, that's fine.
Or disagree.
No, just saying, it's the same as affordability.
It's a whole lot of words. It's
very good to include our community because that's what we're mandated to be here for, the organisation as well as the council.
So you would like it to remain in the first one of the principles?
I would actually like to be in somewhere, anywhere, in our principles.
Well, I suggest we keep it in that first one, and also in brackets, the four well-beings, you can have that community, cultural, and environmental. The only problem with four well-beings is what are we referring to? And if it's the four well-beings that are not going to be there at the current state, then what are we referring to? Well, you keep it in the one.
So, Marcus, risk of getting more semantic than we've already got. Because the well-beings are unfavoured by some, and the direction in which we go, and to make us response ready and resilient, maybe we change the four well-beings out and just put actually name them instead of using the term four well-beings, and then we've got a more future focused.
Sounds good.
And that
So
will
let's
include
start with one of the four of the.
the word community again.
Sounds good. So what we'll do is we'll go good conversation, good listening, and making sure that we're all on the same page, because I guess the next steps of this exercise is to, at the future council meeting, we're going to put them up as council to endorse the principles and the priorities. Because you haven't made any decisions today, we've been workshopping them and testing them and seeing if there are nuances and changes. We're going to bring them up so that you can go, yes, that's our principles for our long-term plan moving forward and our priorities. they sort of fit together. So we'll put them back up, we'll do some magic on them in the background, and we'll make some amendments. But they will be coming up for a decision at the council table in the future, just to make sure that we do lock them in, and then once we start getting into more activity-specific actions, we can lean back on them and use them as well. And we will, in the next steps, we will be looking at developing decision-making criteria as well. So some of the principals will be assisting you in that decision-making criteria. So we've got some process behind making decisions for the process of developing a long-term plan, but also as a opportunity for those future decision makers that will come beyond 2028. As the years 2 and 3 of the LTP play out in the development of the new local government planning documents become known. So it's effectively the next steps. So we're going to come up to council, and then we're going to start bring some decision-making criteria back, aiming for the 4th of June to complement this piece of work as well. So it's the next step, but we're going to test that with exec first to make sure that any decision-making framework is going to be fit for purpose. We've tested it. We know it's potentially going to work before we try and bring it up to you. But we're not quite ready for that testing today. We will be circle back on that. So appreciate your time. We're just on wrapping up and closing off of the workshop today. So yeah, really appreciate your time and working through this. And what we'll do is we'll turn off the live stream, and thank you for your time. We're running 2 hours. So appreciate your time.
Are you happy to?
I think the thing around climate that I always struggle with is when I see a projection for